Hello everyone, my name is BOHDAN and you are on my YouTube channel. I'm just starting out, so I would really appreciate it if you watch this video until the end. And if you enjoy this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help our channel a lot. Today's story is about Connie Debate, a young mother of two who was brutally murdered and tortured by her close husband. This story is very cruel, so I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's get to the story itself. 39-year-old Connie Margot Debates lived in Ellington, Connecticut with her husband, 40-year-old Richard, and their two sons, 9-year-old Richard Jr., who everyone called RJ, and 6-year-old Connor. Connie was originally from Rockville and grew up in a big, loud family. As she got older, planning parties and family get-togethers became something she truly loved. For Connie, there was nothing better than bringing friends and family together, enjoying good food, and playing games. That was what made her happiest. Christmas, New Year's, Halloween, there was never a season when she wasn't planning something. A lot of people slowly drift apart after high school or college, but Connie never let that happen. She would constantly organize reunions and gatherings just to keep everyone connected. She was full of energy and always had this bright, upbeat spirit. Friends said Connie was the first person to give advice and show up when someone needed help, no matter what time it was or how busy she happened to be. One summer at a party, they met Richard Dapes, a computer technician. Some people said you wouldn't normally expect to see them together, but they were a perfect match for each other. The more people got to know Richard, the more they saw his funny side. He was described as a big kid, someone who always tried to make everyone in the room laugh. Connie was exactly the same. Richard invited Connie to meet his parents, and his mother said she understood right away. Connie is special. On July 4th, 2003, the couple got married and started their family life in a beautiful house on a quiet suburban street at number 7 Birchview Drive. After the birth of RJ and Connor, Connie's famous parties became even bigger and more elaborate than ever before. She wanted to find the wildest decorations and props, the best costumes, everything to amaze her children. At one Easter party, she told all the children that if they scattered jelly beans in the garden and went to sleep, they would wake up in the morning to find that all the candies had turned into lollipops. While the children slept, Connie went out into the yard at night. She gathered up all the jelly beans and scattered lollipops everywhere so the children could find them. She was the kind of person who always did more than was expected of her. Putting her whole self into everything she did, she simply loved making people smile. December 23rd, 2015. Christmas was only 2 days away. Connie and Richard's house was already decorated, and all the presents had been wrapped. One thing was obvious: Connie was really looking forward to spending the next few days with her sons. That morning, she got the kids ready for school, and Richard drove them there before heading back home to change into his work clothes. Connie herself was getting ready to leave for a spinning class. Just before 11 in the morning, neighbors living along the quiet Birchview Drive suddenly rushed to their windows and front doors. All they could hear were sirens and police cars speeding down the street toward the Debates family home. Officers had responded after the home security alarm went off, followed by a brief 911 call.
911. Hello? No.
Before long, rumors started spreading that there had been a home invasion at house number 7 on Birchview Drive. Connie and Richard had reportedly been attacked by a masked man who had already fled the scene. Police officers went door to door through the neighborhood, checking nearby homes to make sure the attacker wasn't hiding inside one of them. Residents were told to gather everyone in their houses, stay in a single room, and not come out until police gave the okay. People stayed hidden, waiting for permission to leave, but the news about what had happened inside the Debates family home soon became even more horrifying. Richard was found tied to a chair and covered in blood. He was lying on the floor with the chair still on top of him. Thankfully, he was alive, but he was in unstable condition as paramedics rushed him away in an ambulance. Connie, however, was found dead in the basement of the family home. She had been shot twice, once in the back of the head and once in the stomach. Detectives quickly became convinced the attacker was long gone, and residents were finally allowed to come outside. But when people stepped out of their homes, all they saw was yellow police tape everywhere, flashing lights and officers moving through the street. It looked completely unreal, almost like something straight out of a dark crime drama on TV. After Richard received treatment at the hospital, nurses told detectives he was finally able to speak with them. He was shaken and clearly in shock, but he began explaining everything that had happened that morning. He said that he left home at 8 a.m. to take the children to school, and around 8:30 he returned home to change into his work uniform. He saw Connie changing into sportswear and driving out of the yard in her car. She was heading to a spinning class at the local YMCA, but the session was cancelled, so she had to return right away. Richard's commute to work took about 40 minutes, but after about 10 minutes, after leaving, he realized he had forgotten his laptop. So he also came back. At that moment, a notification came to his phone. The house alarm had gone off. It was triggered by something or someone inside. From his phone, he messaged his boss that he would be late because he wanted to make sure everything was okay at home. He returned home between 8:45 and 9 in the morning, and when he went inside, he heard a noise upstairs. He cautiously went up the stairs and saw a tall man in camouflage clothing and a mask who was rummaging through the jewelry box. The attacker noticed him and, brandishing a knife, began demanding money, credit cards, and PIN codes. Richard said that he handed over his wallet. The man's face was completely covered, but he was tall, about 6 feet 2 inches. According to Richard's estimate, he was stocky and had a deep voice. Richard compared him to Vin Diesel. After that, according to Richard, everything became blurry and events started unfolding too quickly. He heard the horses turn back and shouted at her to run away.
So I yelled to her to get out of the house. My wife didn't run. She must have ran into the basement because we have 2 guns in the house. One was in the basement in a lockbox and one's in our closet. She ran downstairs.
She ran downstairs, but instead of trying to escape the house, she went straight into the basement. Richard thought she was going down there to grab a weapon and protect them. The masked man chased Connie into the basement, and just seconds later, Richard heard 2 gunshots. He later claimed it happened at around 9:05 that morning. After that, Richard ran downstairs and found his wife lying dead on the floor, while the masked man stood nearby holding one of their rifles. Then, according to Richard, the killer started attacking him with a box cutter, slashing at his legs before tying him to a chair with plastic zip ties and burning him with a blowtorch.
I was sitting in the chair, I was kind of half tied up, in shock, I guess.
What do you mean half tied up?
I had one leg free and an arm free. He tied one leg, tied one arm, and he tied my neck fairly tight with a tie wrap. And I got a torch to kind of just blow in his mask a little bit, and it caught on fire. He dropped the blowtorch. I was starting to scream for help. I screamed for help. I couldn't hear a soul. I got really, really dizzy.
Richard said he managed to grab the blowtorch and burn the attacker's face, causing the man to panic and flee the house. Still tied to the chair, Richard somehow managed to drag himself up the stairs and into the kitchen, where he hit the panic button connected to the home security system. After that, he made a short 911 call. The story was so bizarre and horrifying that detectives barely even knew where to begin. They spoke with neighbors along with Connie and Richard's friends. That was when investigators learned the couple had been having serious issues with a contractor just months before the tragedy. They were unhappy with renovation work being done on their home and had even sued him over several $1,000s. Later on, one of their car windshields was smashed, and Connie became convinced the contractor was responsible. She was so frightened that, despite being scared of guns herself, the couple decided to buy a rifle for protection. Richard purchased it and kept it stored in the basement. Forensic testing later confirmed that Connie had been killed with that exact weapon. Police tracked down the contractor. His name was Ken, and he openly admitted that things between him and the couple had ended badly. He was angry about losing money after the civil lawsuit, but insisted he had moved on a long time ago. The timing definitely looked suspicious, but did that make him a killer? Detectives had a feeling it didn't. Ken fully cooperated with investigators. He allowed them to photograph him, agreed to searches, and handed over his devices without hesitation. He had no criminal history, and his height, build, and even his voice didn't match the description Richard had given. And for someone who had spent so much time inside their house, investigators believed Richard probably would have recognized him, even behind a mask. His alibi checked out perfectly, and Ken was officially cleared as a suspect. During the week after Christmas, while most people were getting ready to celebrate New Year's, Connie's family, friends, and the entire Ellington community were preparing to say goodbye to her. No one was surprised by the massive turnout. Even in the freezing cold, hundreds of people stood in line waiting for a chance to pay their respects. After standing there for nearly 3 hours, 2 of Connie's best friends, women who had known her for more than 20 years, spent countless days inside the debate's home and been around both Connie and Richard more times than they could even remember, were shocked when they finally reached him. "How did you know my wife?" Richard asked, staring at them with a completely blank expression. The women just stood there, confused. Eventually, they brushed it off as stress and continued through the line. But later, the 2 of them looked at each other and quietly said the same thing. "That was weird. There wasn't a single mark on him." no bruises, no scratches. And to the surprise of Connie's friends, Richard left the funeral unusually early, actually earlier than almost everyone else.
That they would have any sort of lead by this point, right?
2 weeks and still no arrest in the murder of a young Ellington mother. 39-year-old Connie DeBate was found dead just before Christmas.
Police responded to her Birchview Drive home after the house alarm was activated. They found her husband, Richard DeBate, injured inside the smoky home. Police later found Connie with gunshot wounds to the head and stomach. Her death ruled a homicide, but police have yet to make an arrest, and they've said there is no threat to the public. Still, the entire situation putting residents around town on edge.
Understandably, Fox 61's Katie Corrado went to Ellington today to get some answers. She joins us now with the very latest. Katie?
Audrey and Brent, this murder happened on December 23rd, and people in town tell me the more time passes without answers, the more the rumor mill seems to churn.
I mean, these guys are like family. You know, these ladies have been coming in forever.
Luann Lanzieri hears a lot of the Ellington town chatter inside her nail salon on West Road.
And there's a lot of rumors going around.
Rumors about the murder of Ellington mom Connie DeBate. And 2 weeks since the crime, there's still been no arrest.
It seems like every day someone's coming in and asking, have you heard anything else? You know, this is what we heard.
Luann says most people are confident the police will find whoever killed her childhood friend.
I grew up with her in Vernon as well when she was little. And she was always a wonderful person, so I hope they find the correct person that did this to her.
The other neighbors we talked to did not want to go on camera, but say it is scary and nerve-wracking to know there has not been an arrest. They say this is what everyone around town is talking about, and they just want an answer. But answers so far are scarce.
The detectives are working very hard. They're waiting for a lot of evidence to come back from the labs. They want all their ducks in a row before they can make a decision of what's going on.
Ellington First Selectman Lori Spielman says she's in touch with police nearly every day and has been told this was an isolated incident.
Any idea when something might be coming?
I don't know, maybe next week, but they are still waiting for some of the evidence to come back from the labs.
We reached out to state police tonight for an update on the investigation, but have not heard back. We also tried contacting Connie's husband, Rick DeBate, but he has not responded.
In the following days, Richard, according to many people, appeared surprisingly cheerful. He went to restaurants and bars, threw parties at his house, and joked as if nothing had happened. People said that if you didn't know who he was, you would never have guessed that his wife had been murdered, and he himself had supposedly survived a brutal attack. Richard wrote on Facebook that he was holding on for the sake of his sons and thanked everyone for their support. Grief can manifest itself in many different ways, and there is no single right way to experience it. But soon the whole town started talking about Richard and how strangely he was behaving. Something about all of this was clearly off. His story was starting to fall apart before everyone's eyes, and the individual details were fitting together less and less into a logical picture. Friends, family, even the detectives gradually began to feel uneasy about Richard's behavior and the way he acted after Connie's death. Meanwhile, the investigation at the house on Birch Drive was progressing very slowly. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors saw or heard anything, but because the houses were far apart, the officers realized that this was entirely possible. There were no signs of forced entry, but the basement window was slightly ajar, so it was possible that the killer got inside through it. However, nothing was missing from the house and almost nothing was overturned or disturbed. Police dogs were also unable to pick up any trace of an intruder inside the house. In fact, the very first canine unit that arrived at the scene kept trying to return to Richard while he was sitting in the ambulance, and 2 other dogs failed to detect any scent trail from the supposed attacker who had allegedly fled the property. The wallet Richard claimed had been stolen was later found outside the house, and apparently everything inside was still there. Investigators also discovered that the rifle used to kill Connie had no fingerprints on it at all, not from the attacker, not from Connie, and not even from Richard himself. Richard did have knife wounds, but nurses described them as superficial. And the more he spoke with detectives, the more his story seemed to change, going from complete certainty to vague answers like, I don't know. At first, he claimed he heard the gunshots that killed Connie. Then he said he actually saw her get shot. Later on, he changed his story again and claimed he hadn't seen or heard anything at all. The first officers on scene said Richard told them the killer was still inside the house somewhere, but later, he told other detectives that he had watched the attacker run away. Richard also claimed the entire attack started just before 9 in the morning and that Connie was killed about 5 minutes later. But the 911 call didn't come in until around 10:30. Then came another detail investigators found hard to ignore. The very next day, after Connie's death on Christmas Eve, Richard hired a lawyer, and just 1 week later, He filed paperwork to collect Connie's $475,000 life insurance policy and withdrew $93,000 from an investment account that had been in her name. It slowly became clear that Connie and Richard's marriage may not have been nearly as perfect as everyone believed. Behind closed doors, there were serious problems. In December of 2014, Connie created a note on her iPhone titled, "Why I Want a Divorce." In it, she wrote about Richard's irresponsible behavior with money and described him as a bad father who gave her little attention, affection, or emotional support. Connie wrote, "He takes money from accounts that don't belong to him. He says he's sorry, but never takes responsibility for anything. I know nothing about his day, who he talks to, or what's going on in his life outside of work. I'm tired of covering for him. I'm tired of lying and pretending everything between us is great when it's not." But under a separate section called Reasons to Stay Married, Connie also wrote, "People like him when he's in a good mood. He's fun to be around. I still find him attractive. And when I'm with him, I can truly be myself." Well, what motive could Richard possibly have had? Law enforcement kept this strictly confidential, but they had a motive ever since Richard was first admitted to the hospital. Richard was having an affair with a woman named Sarah, whom he had known since school. Connie knew her too. Sarah had even performed at Richard and Connie's wedding. Richard and Sarah had an on and off relationship, but in May 2015 they started seeing each other actively again, and within a month Sarah found out that she was pregnant. According to the investigation, she asked Richard to leave Connie. During the first 7-hour interrogation at the hospital, Richard himself voluntarily brought up Sarah. He admitted that he had a sexual relationship with her, but explained it by saying that Sarah wanted to have her own child. Sarah turned to the couple for help, saying that she wanted to have a child on her own but couldn't afford the expenses, so she asked Richard to be a donor with certain conditions.
We were going to donate sperm to her to have a kid.
He explained that because the medical procedures were so expensive, they decided to do it, in his words, the traditional way.
Untraditional, but traditional in the way that the baby was conceived?
Yeah.
Okay.
Detectives asked him to clarify. "So Connie knew you were trying to get Sarah pregnant?" detectives asked. "Yeah," he replied. "Connie didn't just agree to it, it was actually her idea."
Do you think your wife had any issues with that?
It was her idea, in a way.
Detectives found that incredibly hard to believe, and things became even more suspicious once they started fact-checking Richard's claims and realized his story kept changing. Eventually, Richard admitted to friends that Sarah's pregnancy had actually been an accident. At first, he had tried to explain the situation in a completely different way. His second version of the story was that Connie supposedly could no longer have children but desperately wanted another baby, so Sarah offered to carry the child for them, and the three of them were all going to raise the baby together. But after investigators reacted with obvious skepticism, Richard was forced to change his story once again and finally admit that the pregnancy was accidental and that he and Sarah had been having an affair for several months.
Was her getting pregnant unexpected?
It was unexpected.
Richard had started lying to Connie about where he was going, telling her he was working late or spending time with friends. But the messages he sent Sarah painted a completely different picture. He told her he loved her, promised he was about to file for divorce, and talked about their future together. At the time of Connie's murder, Sarah was only 8 weeks away from giving birth to their daughter. Richard had even taken Connie on a romantic trip to Vermont, and when Connie posted photos from the getaway on Facebook, Sarah saw them and realized he had been lying about leaving his wife. To this day, no one knows for sure whether Connie ever discovered the affair or the pregnancy, but her friends strongly believe she had no idea. They say Connie absolutely would have told someone if she knew. Whatever the truth was, investigators started to believe Richard had decided to remove Connie from his life and start over solving all the problems he had created in the most horrifying way imaginable. Back in June of 2015, Richard had actually met with a divorce attorney, but he never went through with filing the paperwork. Investigators later found messages on Richard's phone sent to Sarah just 2 days before the murder, where he promised he was leaving Connie. Then, the very next day, he texted Sarah again, telling her he loved her and would see her tomorrow. Connie's phone also revealed an argument between her and Richard that same day. She accused him of lying about some kind of bill or account issue. "You lied to me, and now I'm stuck cleaning up your mess again. What a great weekend, and Merry Christmas." "Oh, it's gonna be a very Merry Christmas," Richard replied. Connie had no idea that Richard was using a secret credit card to pay for flowers for Sarah, hotels, and over $1,000 in expenses at a strip club. In addition, Richard was searching online for potent combinations of over-the-counter drugs, quick, untraceable homemade poison, and tasteless poison that is easy to obtain. If that wasn't enough, another extremely important piece of evidence was about to emerge, but it took time to fully assemble it. Christmas 2016 came, then New Year's, and after that, spring 2017. Connie, who always led an active lifestyle, constantly wore her Fitbit. The day of her death was no exception. The Fitbit data revealed a completely different timeline and story than the one Richard told about that day in the woods. Investigators already knew that Richard waited more than an hour before calling 911. At first, this could still be explained by shock, stress, or confusion about the time. But after analyzing the Fitbit and horse CCTV recordings, as well as data from the computer and home security system, the real chronology of that morning looked completely different. At 8:26 and 8:27 that morning, Richard was actually logged into Facebook from his home computer. And according to his own story, he was supposedly already driving to work at that time. Then, at 8:41, someone logged into Outlook.com from Richard's computer as well. Richard claimed he returned home sometime between 8:45 and 9 o'clock, where he supposedly discovered the intruder inside the house. According to him, Connie arrived home shortly after that and was then shot and killed, but Fitbit data showed that at 8:46 that morning, Connie had only just left for her spinning class. 1 minute later, Richard logged into the home security system and tried to disable the alarm. At 8:50, he successfully turned it off. Then, just 9 minutes later, the alarm was armed again. Not long after that, it was disabled a second time using Richard's personal key fob. At 8:53, Connie arrived at her workout class. A few minutes later, she even sent a Facebook message to her therapist. Then, at 9:04, Richard emailed his supervisor at work. He later claimed he sent the email while sitting in his car on the side of the road. But technical records showed the message had actually been sent from the home IP address. At 9:08, Connie left the building and got back into her car. About 10 minutes later, Richard was browsing the website for Indian Valley YMCA, the exact place Connie had gone for her class. At 9:23, Connie's Fitbit recorded movement as the garage door at the house opened. Then, between 9:40 and 9:46, Connie was active on Facebook. Investigators believed Richard may have been trying to figure out how to lure her into the basement during that time. At 10:05, Connie's Fitbit recorded her final movements. And at 10:12, the panic alarm connected to the home security system was activated using Richard's key fob. All of this data showed that Connie was still alive and going about her normal routine for nearly an hour after the time Richard claimed she had already been killed. Not a single part of his story matched reality. Richard had never actually left the house at all, and the timeline he gave investigators completely fell apart when compared to the digital evidence. Even more importantly, Connie's movements and heart rate showed absolutely no signs that she had been running from an attacker or panicking inside the home. For investigators, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. And finally, in April of 2017,
husband arrested, charged with murdering his wife more than a year ago.
Connie DeBate, an Ellington mother of two, brutally murdered in her home 2 days before Christmas. Well, tonight, finally, a break in that case. A newly released 50-page arrest warrant revealing what was happening inside that home, inside that marriage.
Yeah, we also have this exclusive video showing Mr. DeBate being transported by state police tonight.
Richard was arrested and charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and giving false statements to police.
Grant says DeBate is being held under a $1 million bond and is scheduled to appear in court on Monday. State police say the investigation turned over every stone.
It's very important to follow all leads, follow all evidence, speak to all witnesses, any potential suspects. This is about the victim.
Grant says the lengthy investigation was a collaborative effort from several factions of law enforcement. She claims it was necessary to be extremely thorough during the process in order to prevent possible mistrials in the future. Community members reacting to the arrest of Rick DeBate right in their own backyard.
Anytime somebody loses their life is unfortunate, especially when it's domestic.
Friday afternoon, neighbors say 40-year-old DeBate was pulling onto the family street when he was served an arrest warrant for the murder of his wife, Connie. And now community members feel justice is on the horizon.
They wouldn't bring the case up if they didn't really have a lot of evidence that it was the husband.
Evidence that took nearly a year and a half to gather. Community members say the lengthy investigation is a positive.
Nowadays, the police, they got to cross every T and dot every I before they can come after you, really, or they can blow the whole case. A good lawyer will get them off.
Fortunately, you have a murderer running around the streets if it's supposed to be him, but, the good side about that means they did a thorough investigation. So hopefully, like I said, justice be served.
Still, people in town are still shaken by the crime.
It's kind of a dangerous world, rough world, dangerous country. So you got to watch your back.
Now, we reached out to DeBate's attorney tonight, and he just sent us this statement, which reads, "My client is innocent of these charges, and he looks forward to be vindicated after trial."
Richard posted a $1 million bail and was released until the start of the trial. At that time, he and Saria were raising a child who was born from their relationship. But in 2019, another tragedy struck Connie's family. Her father passed away. He had been seriously ill for a long time, but he held on because he desperately wanted to see justice served for his daughter. Connie's brother said that his body simply couldn't take it anymore. He died without ever seeing his daughter's killer behind bars. The trial of Richard Miz. It was initially supposed to begin in April 2020, but just as the jury had been selected, the COVID-19 pandemic and the death of Richard's lawyer postponed the proceedings. It was only in April 2022 that the trial finally began. By that time, more than 6 years had passed since Connie's murder.
Of a murder trial that has gained worldwide attention.
Now, cameras are not allowed in the courtroom for this trial, but we are allowed to sit in and listen. The now former detective told jurors that Richard DeBate gave law enforcement consent to search his Ellington home, his iPhone, and also allow them to swab him for DNA and gunshot residue. The state presented other evidence, including photographs of Richard DeBate's injuries while he was in his hospital bed, along with clothing, his hospital socks, and a shoe that had blood on it. DeBate's attorney had this to say outside the courtroom today.
As the trial's ongoing, we would love to make comments day to day as each piece of evidence comes in, explain our defense and explain our side. But what we need to do is respect the process here.
Now, that Fitbit that we've been talking about, that hasn't been mentioned in court just yet, but I'm sure it will be brought up. Tomorrow, though, the jury is expected to listen to the rest of that 4-hour recording. We are live from Rockville. Courtney Zeller, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
More than 600 pieces of evidence were presented at trial, and the court heard testimony from over 130 witnesses, including Richard himself. Richard's defense attorneys argued that investigators had developed tunnel vision from the very beginning. According to them, police immediately decided Richard was guilty, and then simply forced all the evidence and timelines to fit that theory. But by that point, everyone already knew that wasn't true. Detectives had investigated every version of events Richard gave them, including the theory involving the contractor, Ken, and they systematically ruled out every other possible suspect. In the end, the digital evidence, the strange lack of a believable crime scene, the canine results, the contradictions in Richard's constantly changing stories, and his affair all pointed to one person, Richard himself. His attorneys also focused heavily on unidentified DNA found inside the house, including what they claimed was DNA recovered from the rifle used to kill Connie. They further argued that the family's cleaning lady had seen a dark figure standing near a window at the DeBates' home. Prosecutors, however, described Richard as a ticking time bomb who had trapped himself in a corner. They argued that he murdered Connie because he believed a divorce would destroy his reputation and cost him the friendships and image he cared so much about. Prosecutors also said he feared the financial consequences of a divorce, along with a possible custody battle over RJ and Connor.
Now, 4 weeks into the trial, one of Connie's sisters took the stand today, saying the family learned she was shot only after a family meeting was held at their parents' home, a day after she was killed. And Richard DeBate was there. She says when he arrived at the home, she heard him say, "I didn't do it. There was someone in the house. They said I need a lawyer." She also says Richard DeBate needed help getting into the house. He looked distraught, physically ill, and it appeared he had been crying. The family gathered around the kitchen table, and she told jurors Richard DeBate told them the story about what happened. He told the family he retained a lawyer, and the lawyer told him not to talk about anything, but believed he owed them an explanation. Connie's sister and her brother-in-law, who also testified today, says Richard DeBate showed no emotion when he told the story. Connie's sister says Richard DeBate mentioned a trip the family was supposed to take after the holidays, going to Great Wolf Lodge, and that he will have to find someone to go with. 7 people who live or lived in the Ellington neighborhood at the time of the crime also testified, saying they didn't see anything out of the ordinary that day.
And the judge mentioned in court today that they are hoping to conclude the state's case by the end, or by the middle, rather, of next week. There is no court tomorrow. It will pick back up on Friday.
Richard took the stand in court and stated that yes, he was in love with both women and felt trapped. He admitted to the affair, but said that did not make him a murderer. He claimed that he misses Connie every day and would never do something like that to his sons. Sarah also testified. She said she never wanted to break up the family, honestly. In fact, she was ready to raise her daughter on her own and not even put Richard's name on the birth certificate. If he decided to stay with Connie, she was in tears. Sarah explained that she feels ashamed and hurt by everything that happened, but she never pressured Richard to leave his wife. Sarah said that they never discussed any plan to harm or kill Connie, and she added that Richard never confessed to her about Connie's murder. After 5 weeks of trial, both sides finished presenting their cases, and in May 2022, he was found guilty on all counts.
Guilty on all counts. A jury has reached a verdict in the Richard DeBate murder trial.
Mark and Aaron, a lot of surprise here at the courthouse. The jury probably deliberated for at the most 3 hours. Richard and Connie's families had emotional reactions as the verdict was read.
Connie was essentially sentenced to death, while this convicted murderer has been living his life while out on parole for 6.5 years. There will be no closure for the Margada family, but there is finally justice for Connie.
She was a terrific sister, mother, daughter. I really loved her. I remember when she was born, I'm 10 years older. My father brought me to the hospital to see her for the first time, and the nurse held her up to the window. And that was very memorable, seeing the new baby for the first time.
Richard's defense team said they're prepared to keep fighting for their client.
They only started about 24 hours ago, and it was a 5-week trial, so I'd say we were a bit surprised. I think all three of us very disappointed with the outcome. It's been a lot of effort, an exhaustive case, but again, we're going to have more filings. We'll say more on those. Thank you. Thank you, Trent.
First up right now at 4, we start with some breaking news this afternoon. The man convicted in the Fitbit murder trial will spend 65 years in prison. Thanks for joining us today.
The judge described Richard's crime as brutal, calculated, and impossible to comprehend. His earliest possible release date is May of 2087. Before he was escorted out of the courtroom, Richard made one final statement. "I stand before you as an innocent man, and I will never stop fighting for justice for my wife, Connie, who I think about every single day." Even now, his parents continue to believe him. For them, it's impossible to accept that just 2 days before Christmas, he could have lured his wife into the basement, killed her, staged the entire scene, and then carried on as if nothing had happened. In October of 2024, Richard filed an appeal of his conviction.
Defense attorney for Richard DeBate, Trent Lalima, addressing 6 justices in a room full of UConn law students, claiming the state prosecutor Matthew Gdansky engaged in a pattern of impropriety that denied DeBate a fair trial.
Perhaps some of the most damaging would be the ticking time bomb question, which was 24 hours, almost exactly 24 hours. After that, those notes had been excluded by the trial court. The state asked, "Did you feel like a ticking time bomb?" Ticking time bomb makes my client out to be a dangerous person.
I don't think that there is anything improper at all about using the defendant's own words in a prior inconsistent statement to impeach his testimony when she testifies.
Isn't this supposed to be a fair trial, not a gamesmanship episode?
At the time of recording this episode, the case was still under review by the Supreme Court. In many of the cases we examine, people start to believe that murder is the only way out, the only possible way to solve the problem, and for them it really starts to make sense. But the scale of the pain that remains after losing someone, the consequences, and all the cruelty of it just don't seem to reach them. Now Connie's sister Leslie is raising her sons. Because of Richard's lies, the children live in fear, thinking that a stranger could break into their home. And only now are they beginning to realize what their father did to their mother. Connie's mother often recalls their last phone conversation. She remembers the first words she heard when she picked up the phone. "Mom, I love you. You're my best friend." And that, she says, described Connie perfectly. She was a kind and caring person. People couldn't help it. She made everyone around her feel special and important. She was always like that. Her best friend, Kim, said, "I deeply miss the sound of her laughter. I miss the way she made me feel. I miss how incredibly fun she always was to be around, and how much vibrant life she brought into my own life, and the lives of every single person who was lucky enough to be around her. I miss everything, absolutely everything about her,